Welcome back, everybody, to the Land Between the Meadows, the Kentucky History Podcast. We're here with another Kentucky Spotlight, and I'm glad to have join us Peter Brackney, who has got a list of things he's responsible for here. He's the creator of the Kentuckian, is that correct?
The Kentuckian.
Yeah. Website, blog. He's a local lawyer at Brackney Law in Lexington, but mainly and most importantly, he is the author of Lost Lexington and his recently released novel, The Murder of Geneva Hardman and Lexington's Mob Riot of 1920. Now, how are you doing today, Mr. Brackney?
Doing good, Jameson. Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, we have a lot of authors on here, and it's a history podcast, but your books fall in line great with the podcast and our listeners. I think they will really enjoy us kind of talking about them, and just maybe reach out and get a copy and enjoy it, man. I really enjoyed reading it. It's definitely the Lost Lexington, and I'm about halfway through Geneva Hardman, and I really enjoy it as well. As you're a history buff. You're a history buff, right?
Absolutely.
Tell us about yourself.
All right. Well, I'll make a confession first. I was born in Ohio.
Oh.
I know, but I had the blood transfusion a long time ago, and as you can see, I bleed blue. So,
all right, you're good.
Grew up on Short Street in downtown Lexington, and kind of caught and developed a history bug when I lived down there. Mm-hmm. And the house that I grew up in, the newest part, was built in 1843, mm-hmm. and a lot of architectural history, obviously, that I grew up riding my bike around downtown, mm-hmm. And just kind of ensconced in all of that history. And fast forward a whole lot of years, and I took my last law school final exam. Mm-hmm. And I was so relieved, because then all I had to do was, take the bar exam. So I got in the car after that last law school exam, and I just started driving. Mm-hmm. And I had no destination in mind, but mm-hmm. ended up kind of on some back roads and just exploring, Kentucky's beauty and its mm-hmm. history and all those historic markers, and caught my eye, and I'd pull over on the side of the road and take pictures of them. And that was kind of what started the Kentuckian blog.
Yeah.
And it was also a great way over that summer to avoid extra studying for the bar exam.
Yeah.
It was a distraction, so it was fun.
Yeah, good distraction.
It was awesome, and fortunately, I did pass the bar and on the first try, so that was good.
That was good. Yeah.
Even with that distraction. So about 5 years later, or 4 or 5 years later, the History Press down in South Carolina reached out to me, mm-hmm. And they had picked up on the blog, and mm-hmm. They wanted to know if I was interested in writing a book. And at that time, Centerpoint in Lexington had gone down a couple of years earlier. And so there was a lot of interest in historic preservation. And so that's what was when Lost Lexington, my first book, came out. Mm-hmm. I was in 2014, kind of exploring those backstories of what was lost. So that's kind of my story of how I got into writing history and that sort of thing.
Well, it's a very good book and a very good connection. That's the thing I kind of enjoy a lot about history, is getting those connections, getting those stories. Both your books hit on those. And just while I was reading the book, and I don't want to get into too much detail, I guess, because people might want to go read them themselves. But Henry Clay is mentioned in your book. A bunch of, I guess you want to call them these. I guess you call them these aristocratical hierarchy people. I don't know.
Right.
And those things, and I mean, I'm just glued when I'm like, oh man, this has got Henry Clay. What's he lived at this place, and you talk about John Bradford, which is somebody I didn't really know as much about, but you find those connections. And
John Bradford's a really interesting fellow, because he was involved in so much in early Lexington. Mm-hmm. He was the publisher of the Kentucky Gazette, mm-hmm. That first newspaper in Kentucky. And so his house was demolished. It was kind of chapter 1 of Lost Lexington. Mm-hmm. And it was demolished in mid-1950s to make way for a parking lot. And it's still a parking lot.
Yeah.
But there were 3 people, if you know Kentucky history, you'll recognize some of the names. John Bradford, Thomas Hart, who was involved in Sycamore Shoals and the Treaty for Transylvania, mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And then Laura Clay. And so it's an election year, so I always have to give a shout out in an election year to Laura Clay.
Yeah.
She was Cassius Marcellus Clay's daughter. He, of course, was the Lion of Whitehall and the abolitionist.
Yes.
And Laura Clay was an ardent supporter of women's rights and trying to get women the right to vote. And so in 1920, of course, is when the 19th Amendment was passed, giving women the right to vote. But she was opposed to that. So an ardent supporter of women's rights didn't want that amendment to pass in the U.S. Constitution because she also was a strong supporter of states' rights. And so she didn't think the federal government should get involved in who should be voting, which I thought was interesting.
Yes.
But it's an election year, and so we have to give the shout out to what occurred in San Francisco in 1920. Laura was out there as a delegate representing Kentucky in the Democratic National Convention of 1920. And her name was placed for nomination to be president of the United States. And it was the first time in a major political party convention that ever happened, that a woman's name was placed. So that was history breaking. And it's sad that the place where she lived is gone, and that story, has faded. Away.
Yeah, and you mentioned in the book that it's replaced by a parking lot, and I mean it happens. I mean the times of change come and take down a historical site, and I mean it hurts me because I enjoy historical sites, of course. But a parking lot, I'm like, man, a parking lot. What was so important that we tore down this building that would have been so historically relevant and cool? And I mean, you talk about her being the first, nominated candidate. People probably don't even realize that. It's a fact that, like you said, been brushed away, and it pains me. It pains me. But another good, I guess, building, architectural building you bring up is the Phoenix Hotel, which I was very intrigued. I've been doing these little videos about like governors of Kentucky and all that, and Aaron Burr, of course, has come up a few times, and
it comes up a couple times in the book.
Yeah. So it's really interesting because I think you said at one point 3 presidents were in Lexington at the same time. And
so it was a 4th of July celebration, and it was on President James Monroe was on the Grand Tour of the South. Yeah. And which was, don't hold me to it, listeners, but 1825, I think. Yeah. And he was traveling along, and he brought with him 2 war heroes from the War of 1812, Zachary Taylor and Andrew Jackson. So while he's on this tour, their stop was in Lexington, and they stayed at the Phoenix Hotel, and all 3 of them under the roof at the same time. Yeah,
that's crazy. I mean, to think about that, and the historical moment, I guess you could call that, in the middle of Lexington. And at the beginning of the book, you talk a lot about Lexington, and at this point, though, Lexington is not really that big. I'll guess it's still compared to Louisville at the time, I guess, if you can.
Yeah, and I'm not sure about population. Of course, Lexington isn't on the Ohio River. So the industry there, it is a little bit different as a result. But Lexington, certainly with the hemp industry and some of the industry here, we had a very flourishing community. We were the Athens of the West because of Transylvania University. So for a time, we were larger and more significant than Louisville. And I can't remember when that crossover, ended up occurring. That Louisville became the larger city. Yeah.
And another, as I was reading the book, you talk about Frances Peter, who is and I've read about half of her diary, and I was like, oh man, I was like, this is a great connection. I know who he's talking about. But her diary was just the Civil War in Lexington was very a unique time. Have you ever read Peach Leather and Rebel Gray?
I haven't.
Check it out because it's a good one. because it's the flip side. It's a woman who her husband was on Confederate. I think it was in Woodford County, and he goes to Confederate, and it just talks about the opposite side of. It's a great parallel. You got Francis Peter, who's kind of the Union side,
right?
And you got this lady. I can't think of her name right off, but is the rebel side, and it talks about Kentucky and the Civil War, and just how unique and different it was, martial law, all those things.
Right.
Good perspective, counter perspectives.
And the thing I love about those diaries, and I haven't read the one you mentioned, but the thing that's so cool is that it's not, the general did this and all these different things, but it's these teenagers or young people, and it's just what their observations are of what daily life was like in their community. Yeah. And it's there's obviously political leaning to it, either for the North or for the South, based on what the kids heard in their houses or their churches or whatever.
Yeah.
But it's more about went to the market and there were troops, and it just kind of what was experienced day to day,
the day-to-day life. Yeah, exactly. And it was it's really interesting. I really like those diaries, and that's the one thing. If somebody kept a diary, it's so much easier to kind of get their historical perspective or what was going on in that time, which a lot of people, well, I say a lot of people, but that's probably not, a lot of, I guess, wealthier people, they were more apt to keep a diary and so forth. And oftentimes you get those stories. You got to improvise a bit more about, what was going on, say in somebody who was just like a foot soldier or in that sense. But you get the generals and especially presidents, governors, they have a lot of stuff you can kind of back up on and get,
right.
So that's one thing. I guess, do you have a preference? What's your preference of history to enjoy or to look into?
In terms of what?
Kentucky specifically, that's obviously what I kind of look into.
Right.
United States.
So I really love, anything that's Kentucky centric. That's kind of my passion because I'm here.
Yeah.
And I've recently read a couple of different books on, as an attorney, a couple of biographies on some Supreme Court justices. First, which was a really interesting read about Sandra Day O'Connor. And I just started reading. I'm about 25 pages in. I started it last night. Biography about Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
Cool.
A Life. So just really interesting to read those stories. And what women overcame rising through the legal profession, which is traditionally such a male-dominated profession, and the struggles that they faced.
What do you know about Thomas Todd?
Thomas Todd.
Yeah.
Justice Todd?
Yeah, Justice Todd. Yeah.
Justice Todd? Not a whole lot.
Yeah.
Not a whole lot.
Well, I mean, I've been looking at him a lot, but mainly because of the time period, early Kentucky. But he was the first justice west of Appalachian Mountains. So
right. And he was from Frankfort, right?
Danville.
I mean, that's right.
He lived in. He mainly lived in Danville. He probably lived in Frankfort for a little time too.
Okay. I feel like there's a sign for him over on Wapping Street.
He's got him a.
What is that marker called? Celebrity Row in Frankfort.
Yeah. But he's interesting. I mean, thing is, we can get to Supreme Justice things. He was very. He was not that controversial. He did not have a lot of decisions and a lot of dissents or anything. He actually, because during the time he had to go on circuit and would have to go to all the courts around in Nashville and all that. So he was not. He was on the move a lot, and he did not. I think it said 644 cases were sought, and out of all those, he only decided on 14. So he was not.
The Supreme Court operated a whole lot differently.
Yes, yeah.
A whole lot differently.
Yeah.
Another justice from Kentucky, of course, is John Marshall Harlan, who wrote the dissent in Plessy v. Ferguson.
Yeah.
And he was known as the great dissenter, and his opinion or his dissent in Plessy really became the cornerstone of Brown versus Board of Education. And I've seen his name tossed around some as a potential statue to replace Jefferson Davis in the Capitol Rotunda.
Yeah. There was some other I saw. I cannot remember who it was. I heard. I mean, any other names that you know of that have been tossed around as far as putting up statues?
I've seen Georgia Power's name. She was the first African American female legislator to serve in Kentucky, and she was from, I think she was from Bourbon County.
Yeah. I'm trying to think. I heard another one, but I cannot think of what the guy's name was. But he was a soldier, African American soldier, and
that's right.
He just died, like I would say, 10 years ago, maybe. But I'm losing his name. But
I can't remember it off the top of my head. But that's the one. There's a state legislator from Northern Kentucky, I think, that filed a bill to have that, to push for that.
Yeah. Which I mean is very exciting. I don't know you personally, but I was all for taking down Jefferson's monument. I mean, people can argue what they want to argue, but I'm completely 100% behind seeing a different.
Well, this is a history podcast, so the argument that people keep making is that we're erasing history when we take the monument down, and that's simply not the case. That the history is not being removed. We're simply figuring out a better way to tell history.
Better way to tell the story.
And making sure that the story is told. And there's a whole state park down at Fairview that tells the story of Jeff Davis. And it's not being erased from history, but it's being told differently. And we're putting our best forward under the rotunda. Ephraim McDowell, Henry Clay, and Abraham Lincoln being and Alvin Barkley are the ones that are there.
Good company. If you want to, and I mean, I know people can argue, and they would want to argue. I'm sure there's people out there that but there's statues. I don't get the it's kind of like an idol. If you put a statue here, you're saying, hey, look at this person and what they did, and
right.
Like it or love it, slavery was bad, and if you supported it, that's not good. And Jefferson Davis obviously did that. I mean, you can argue. I mean, you can't really argue, but if someone wanted to argue that, that wasn't the main reason he joined the South, it was for states' rights or whatever. He was still supporting what the South, one of the things the South wanted, and which was a terrible thing. So.
Yeah, and you look at when those statues and memorials and everything was put up, it was, not in the immediate aftermath. It was done at a heightened time when that lost cause mentality was being spread, and where the Klan and different groups were terrorizing blacks in throughout the South. And a book I've got in my stack to read is a book about called Wilmington's Lie. Wilmington, North Carolina. And in 1898, there was a coup. So Wilmington had a black city government, a Republican fusionist city government is what they called it. And it was majority black. The talk about ballot stuffing, the Dixiecrats ran them out. There were about 50 killed and over 2,000 refugees that were kicked out of Wilmington during all of this. And just a horrible time in that region's history. And so I'm curious to learn a little bit more about that. So that's on my to-read list.
I don't know about you, but my to-read list is very long.
Yes.
Which you talk about the 19. Was that around 1920? What was that?
That was in 1898.
1898. Okay, so before the turn of the century, and we talked about. I don't know if you are as familiar with 1920 the Corbin. In Corbin, they had a lot of race riots where they ran a lot of African Americans out, which were working on the train. It's a big detail. It's a discussion to talk about another time. I believe. What was it? What's the one that happened out in Nebraska? What was it called?
Nebraska?
Yeah, I just saw. It was around 1920 and all that.
I can't remember Nebraska. Of course, there was the Tulsa, what occurred in 1921.
Tulsa, that's it.
Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Yes, yeah. Wrong.
And I'm not fully familiar on that entire history, but I know Tulsa Tulsa's African American district burned, and it was just horrendous.
And I bring it up. It sounds similar to the North Carolina in the Wilmington, as African American run community, very thriving, very successful, and things went back. Which brings me to 1920, which brings me to your other book, The Murder of Geneva Hardman, and Lexington's mob riot of 1920. And the thing, I get a lot, and when I'm reading a story or history, it's finding that story. And, we have a lot of history, of course, about Aaron Burr, George Washington, Jefferson Davis. You can find all the documentation and a lot of history to those. But then you get to these smaller stories that you don't get as often. I believe that's kind of where Geneva Hardman comes in. You're really gonna have to dig to find the story, but it's always good when someone does the digging, as you, and tells the story, because I'm a father, you're a father. And just the thought of losing a child, it is rough. It's rough to handle. And when I was reading it and thinking about her mother, I was thinking, no, man, this is just tough. So give us a little background, I guess, on Geneva Hardman, or what brought you to that story, or even how you even found it.
Well, so John D. Wright's Heart of Lexington, I think that's the name of the book. He published it back in the 80s. There's like a paragraph on what took place, because it was a very significant event in the course of Lexington's history. And so there was a little squib on it, and I probably read that 15 years ago. And so it's those little things that you just kind of throw, the seeds that are in your head. But nothing really came of it. About 8 or 9 years ago, my minister wrote the history of our church, South Elkhorn Christian Church in Lexington, which is a Disciples of Christ congregation. And that was the church where Geneva and her family attended.
Wow. Yeah.
And so in the history of the church, he included a few paragraphs about what took place. And, it piqued my interest a little bit more. And then a couple of years ago, I started thinking, there's got to be more to this story. The longest expose on the story that had been written at any point was Death at the Courthouse by Winston Coleman, who was an attorney historian in Lexington, and he wrote it back in the early 1950s, which was still at a point where, in our history, it was before desegregation. The story was certainly told in entirely with one perspective, and I thought there were a lot of perspectives and historical context that were missing from the story. So I thought, it would be nice to be able to try and tell a full version of the story in time for the centennial of what took place. So Geneva Hardman was a little 10-year-old girl, and she lived in southwestern Fayette County, Lexington, and in a little community called South Elkhorn. Because back before the merger, there were lots of little towns before Lexington and Fayette County all became one. And so South Elkhorn was this little town close to the Jessamine County line. And she was walking to school on a February 4th, 1920. It was a rainy morning, and about an hour later, the search party found her because she hadn't gotten to school, and they found her knapsack along her school bag, basically on the side of the road. And it was actually her mother and a couple of the neighbors that found her lying in the corn shock. And quickly, a black suspect was
named,
set upon, and local authorities and non-authorities, lynch mob basically, everybody started hunting, looking for Will Lockett. And it took about 8 or 9 hours and a real circuitous route all over part of Fayette and Jessamine County before he was apprehended by Officer White and Dr. Collette from Versailles, and out in Dixon Town, which is even further. It's in Jessamine County. Close to the county. It's right near the Woodford, Jessamine County line.
and just just the story, and it ironically, it's kind of relevant today. But and I don't know. Stop me if I get too much into it. I don't want to spoil anything.
Oh, you're fine.
Just the quick accusation, I guess, if you want to call it that, and throughout that goes to trial, correct? And,
well, so he confessed. So after he was arrested, he was driven back down to downtown Lexington to the police station, and he was questioned. He ultimately admitted to killing, and it was a bludgeoned to death with a rock. It was a violent murder, yeah. And likely there was a sexual assault as well. But he did confess to the crime at that point. Now, what we know now under legal jurisprudence, there was no Miranda rights. It was probably a coerced confession. There were a lot of things that went into it. But as a result of the confession, the trial that occurred about, let's say, murder was on Wednesday. The trial was the following Monday. So Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, 5 days later, was only a determination of whether Will Lockett would be executed or whether he would receive life in prison, because he confessed guilt was already concluded.
Now, what links did you have to go to find? Like, what research did you do once you got the bug? Hey, I want to find the story. Where do you go to get this stuff? Where do you go to get these facts or the I guess, documentation?
So one place that I started was the Kentucky Room at the Lexington Public Library. They have the microfilm for all of the Lexington Herald and the Lexington Leader. And so I went back and I got copies of all the newspaper articles that were contemporary. Yeah. I went to the State Archives in Frankfurt and I pulled the court file. So I'd have that. There was, and I can't remember, I think it's in UK's records, but I was able to obtain the military reports that were declassified in the 1980s that were from immediately after the trial. Yeah. Martial law was declared in Lexington for about 2 weeks because 6 people were shot by the National Guard outside the courthouse because the 10,000 member mob that was still wanting to lynch him was outside. And so there's these military reports, military intelligence reports that were very telling about what took place. So there's just pulling research from a lot of different places. Of course, J. Winston Coleman's death at the courthouse was a starting point. So it was kind of a synthesis almost of what had taken place a little bit for some general timeline. Yeah. And of course, then there's a couple of other unique sources. And one of those was the great niece of Geneva Hardman, who I interviewed a couple of times to understand a little bit more of the family story. Yeah. Yeah. And that was interesting to talk with her. So and this is jumping back to, does the library have the Gazette too? Wow. It does. Is there a way to get online with those? And I know this is just for my personal. So they are not fully. Some of it is digitized, but not all of it. Yeah. But they do have a local history index that you can go to local.lexpublib.org, and you can actually do a search through the local history index, and that way you can at least get little squibs from where your search terms will be found, and then also your date and page and column number for being able to access the files that you can make when you can get back into the libraries again.
Yeah. It's so nerdy to say, but man, I really want the libraries to open up so I can take back some of the books I got and get some more. But
so, and then the research, and the fun thing about history, and you know this, there's always more. Yeah. There's always more. So when the book came out, it came out the beginning of February of this year, 2020. And it was about a week and a half before Christmas when I get an email from a college student at UK who was in the process of indexing records at MI King Library at the special collections. Well, it was the personal papers of the attorney who had represented Will Lockett.
Whoa.
Well, it seems like Samuel Wilson took some of the official court record out of the official court record, because the official court record that I looked at in Frankfurt was incomplete.
Oh, wow.
And so I was able to learn a lot more about some of the effort that was taken by Lockett's two attorneys in his defense. Mm-hmm. There was transcript of the testimony from the one witness who testified, which led more support to the fact that Geneva was sexually assaulted. Mm-hmm. It was just a very fun. Do you ever watch the show Who Do You Think You Are on TLC?
No, I've not.
Or not Who Do You Think? Yeah, Who Do You Think You Are on TLC? Is it the genealogy
one?
It's a genealogy show.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
And it's a fun one to watch, but it's got basically celebrities that are to learn about their family history. Yeah. And they'll go to state archives or these big university libraries or different things. And they'll meet with the librarian there and talk, and they'll have this amazing moment of discovery. And of course, because it's made for TV, everything's already laid out for them. Yeah. It's all just beautifully set up, and they don't do any of the real research themselves. Well, I had a little bit of a "Who do you think you are" moment. So this college student who'd been doing the research, Jake, and I walk into the special collections room at MI King, and he's got the file laid out. Wow. And it was this kind of surreal, fun moment.
Here's the celebration.
It was amazing. And since the book has come out, I've had a couple of other folks who have reached out to me with some family stories and some different things that ultimately I think the book probably could have a updated and enhanced version, which is always an amazing thing to be able to do when it's a century-old story.
Yes.
In the introduction, you referred to it as a novel. And I'll clarify that, but first I'll take it as a compliment. One that indicates to me that you think it's very readable. Yeah. Which a lot of times nonfiction is not as readable. So I'll take that as a compliment, that it's a good, easy read. So listeners, it's a good read. Yeah. But it is nonfiction. It's a telling of the events as they occurred in 1920.
Now, you said the student was able to find all this information. You did get all that in the book, right?
No. No. That's why I say I could have a second version here. So all of that information I discovered. He didn't reach out to me until mid-December, and the book was coming out in February. So my manuscript had been turned in 2 months before that. Oh man! So I was locked. And wanted to make sure the book came out, and it's a complete story. But there's, as I said, there's always more history that we can pick up.
Yes, and that happens a lot whenever I do a podcast or so forth. I'll talk about this. Rockcastle County, which is where I'm from, and then like the next, I'll be like, oh man, I missed all this stuff I should have said. But it's very easy for me to just do another episode and say, hey, I missed this stuff. For you, and that is a bitch, man. That would be, man. I would try my best to halt the presses and get it in there.
Yeah, unfortunately, halting the presses was difficult when you're trying to make that. I wanted it to be ready for the 100th. Yeah. The anniversary, and so actually the book launch event, which due to coronavirus a month later, there have not been a whole lot of Geneva Hardman events. I've been able to have book signings and readings and that sort of thing, which has been disappointing as an author, because I love being able to talk with readers and see people. But the book launch event was actually at the church in the historic sanctuary. So it was a talk about Geneva Hardman and the murder of her murder and the trial and mob riot. there in the historic sanctuary where her funeral had been held.
Wow. Yeah.
And I did that on the 100th anniversary of her passing.
Wow. I mean, was any of her descendants or anything like that there present?
So the great niece and that great niece's niece were there, as well as a couple of the former senior ministers of the church. Were there. I think we had three ministers from the church. Robert Terry, who's the police historian for the Lexington Police Department, brought some of the public safety museum's artifacts from that day, some of the bullet fragments from the riot and different things. Yeah. He brought those. We had a little display set up, so it was a neat evening.
That's very exciting, and to get artifacts. I mean, that's even cooler. I mean, to have those kind of things to relate to or put in there. And the one thing that whenever I was first reading it, and you get caught up. I get caught up with Lexington being this big city, and I lived in Lexington for 3-4 years during my college days. But this town, but this part of Lexington at the time was very farm oriented. It was agrarian, I guess you could say. Wasn't it compares more to a small community. I live in rural Lincoln County, Rockcastle County now. Mm-hmm. It compares more to something similar to that, and I guess just connecting that is always.
I mean, this was a little 1.5 lane country. Harrodsburg Road at that point was a little 1.5 lane country road. Mm-hmm. Dirt. It was rural farming land. Mm-hmm. And in 1920, Lexington's population was only about 40,000.
Yeah, wow.
So Lexington proper was a much smaller town than it obviously is today.
Yeah, and well, Lexington, I feel like just that bluegrass mentality that's been there for so long. The horse farms and so forth, and just the Clays. You go talk about the Clays, and you get into that historical. Which I'm a nerd. I think everything in Kentucky is super cool and historical, but right. Lexington kind of has that. I compare it a lot to say Stanford and around Boonesboro. You get that real historical feeling of what Kentucky, how Kentucky started and so forth.
Yeah.
Any other? I think I might have saw a tweet or something like that. But got any other plans? I mean, besides maybe Gina Hardman, Volume 2. What other kind of writing?
Foster Ackerman, who's another local attorney, and I have co-authored a book called A History Lover's Guide to Lexington and the Bluegrass region, and that is due out in September.
Cool.
So that has been a fun one. We broke up the book and into a couple of different sections, and each of us kind of tackled some different genres, and that will be out in time for the Breeders' Cup, which will be I think in early November at Keeneland, assuming all of that.
Yeah.
It may be a Breeders' Cup with no fans in attendance, but that's each day is a little bit different right now.
Yeah, I know the feeling. It's good. We did kind of get a bit of a relief, but all these other states, man, are having these peaks and all this stuff. I'm afraid. I'm a school teacher. We start in August, hopefully. Yeah. We'll see how it goes, but I'm afraid lockdown is creeping back in.
I imagine that in 50 to 100 years, the historians are going to have to write multiple volumes about 2020.
Yes. What's behind the next door? What's coming in July? You talk about the guide to the bluegrass. Is there a guide to Eastern Kentucky, maybe a Western Kentucky, or
Well, there is a guide that somebody has already written to Louisville, and there's always the opportunity Kentucky has so many untold stories.
Oh gosh, yeah.
And I think what I love and what I love about both of the books is I'll mention the Henry Clays and I'll mention the Abraham Lincolns and I'll mention the big names, but I think the most fascinating parts are those everyday people.
Yes.
And what life was really like. And I think telling history through that lens a little bit more is what's fascinating. So in Lost Lexington, I try and tell a whole lot of backstories.
Yes.
About what took place, and just learning about the places and spaces through that lens. And then, of course, Geneva Hardman, there's a lot about Governor Morrow and some different individuals that tie it in that people can recognize. Those places, individuals from history, but it's those underlying backstories, I think, that are so rich and so undertold.
And those to me are the best as well, because we all you had probably, when did you say you moved? How old were you when you moved?
When I moved
to Kentucky.
I was going into first grade.
Okay, so like you had fifth grade social studies, history in Kentucky, like just about everybody else. And
right.
I mean, it's
field
fine.
trips to Boonesboro and Shakertown.
Yeah. But there's so much more that is left out of that. I mean, do you know who John C.C. Mayo is?
John Mayo. He would be the physician down in Paintsville, correct?
Not physician.
No, he was not a physician. Mayo was coal, I'm going to guess.
Coal, he's the coal man.
Coal.
Yes.
That's pretty easy. You hear Mayo and you think Mayo Clinic. But the Mayo Mansion down in Paintsville.
Yes, yeah.
Been down there. So, and that's one of the fun things on the Kentuckian website. Has been, I'll kind of I tag everything with different counties. So I'd love to spend more time out in the western part of the state, but as I've gone to court in Pikeville or Ashland, I kind of get into some of the
eastern,
in the backwoods and some of the hollers and have a good time exploring.
Yeah, and I bring him up specifically because I read his biography.
Okay.
And we've been on our regular podcast episode, we've been talking a lot about him, and I just got done recording with Mr. Pope about him as well, so he's on my mind. And that's one thing, I bring him up, I'm like, nobody in Kentucky knows about him at all. And I mean, he was a huge impact on Eastern Kentucky. And I mean, we argue, but he basically sold out Eastern Kentucky, if you want to say it that way. It's such an interesting, at one time he was the richest man in Kentucky, and nobody knows anything about him at all. And
what was his involvement with the broad form deeds?
He created it.
He was the one that created the broad form deeds. Okay. Yeah.
And he I mean, you probably know the story. He sold or bought all the land from the haulers and the mountain men or the mountaineers, and then once the railroad came in, he started making loads of money. And I think at the time he died early, which was kind of a sad thing, because he's a controversial character, because you can very easily say, look, he sold out Eastern Kentucky and it went it went down from as soon as he died. But you've got to think, if he lived, maybe it'd have been a little different. But ifs and buts don't get us anywhere. But he anyway, a very interesting fellow. I think at the time of his death he was worth about $20 million, which would have in today's be about $500 million. Yeah. So he was a very rich guy. But anyway, that's it.
Although as the creator of the broad form deed, I'm going to guess we probably won't be putting his statue up in the
No. He does not deserve a statue of any.
And I studied the broad form deed a little bit, and so as I recall, it's basically severed the surface rights from the underground mineral rights in some respect, but did it in a very underhanded way, so that it was no information to the landowner.
Yeah, they could do whatever they wanted.
Pennies on the dollar, and they could do whatever they wanted with the surface.
Yes.
And so those were declared unconstitutional by the state Supreme Court. I can't remember when that was. You may have better finger on it.
It was late, like after later than the 70s. I mean, it was a lot farther 70s. Than you would think. You'd think they would have been like, this is terrible, but money drives a lot. Which we'll talk. Listen to for those listeners, you'll get all the information on John C.C. Mayo later, or on the episode you've already listened to. We need to wrap things up, I guess, and we could go on forever. But I typically give a history quiz to all the Kentucky Spotlights, typically from this county that they're from or whatever. I didn't tell you specifically because I kind of think you're going to know all these answers anyway. And since you're deep in the history, I wanted to spring it on you. If that's okay. You ready for it?
Now you said from the county I'm from.
Fayette County.
So you're treating me as Lexington, okay? Because I live in Jessamine County, and that's
okay. All right. So first question.
All right.
Where does Fayette County get its name?
That would be the General Marquis de Lafayette.
Correct. Very good. What year was it founded?
Well, that is a good question. It was one of the 3 original counties, which split off from Kentucky County. And that division occurred 1785.
Just don't add the 5.
Was it 1780?
1780. Yeah.
Okay.
So it, Fayette, Lincoln, and Jefferson were the 3 counties. This one, I got an answer, but it could be debated. Who founded Lexington? Like, who was the first settler?
Well, I generally ascribe to the Robert Patterson theory, who was camping on the town branch in 1775 when word allegedly arrived of the Battle of Lexington.
There you go. Great. Good job. Now, which brings us to the next question that I know you know the answer to. Where does Lexington get its name?
The Battle of Lexington.
Yeah. So you're doing good. Now this one.
But I'm going to throw out one real quick.
Go ahead.
Because you mentioned that, I want to tie that back into the Geneva Hardman.
Okay, go for it.
So W.E.B. Du Bois, famed civil rights leader, he wrote in The Lancet, which was the NAACP's publication, after the mob riot and the deaths of the 6 that were shot by the National Guard or the Guardsmen in the first time that state and local officials repelled a lynch mob in the South. So we're talking a huge event here.
Yeah.
W.E.B. Du Bois described those events as the Second Battle of Lexington.
Wow, there you go. Full circle here.
So thanks for that tie-in.
Now, this one, and this one I had to dig deep because I was like, he's going to get most of these. I got to throw a hard one, and you may get it because you've got the cred to get this one. And I
get a margin of error of 5 years, right?
Yeah. I give this credit to if you're ever on Facebook, there's a Kentucky History Facebook page. And the guy who runs it has, loads of stuff. And he sent me this, I don't know, a long time ago. And I read up on it. And he had a lot of good information. But do you know who King Solomon of Lexington is?
King Solomon. King Solomon was he was a town drunk, basically. Yeah. And King Solomon was also a noble character who, during the cholera epidemic, buried many of the town's dead. And he was able to do so without falling ill to the disease. There's a suspect idea as to why that is. And do you know why that is?
I don't know exactly. It would have to do with his drinking. Well,
so cholera, of course, is spread through fecal matter, or for listeners, poop in the water. and if you don't drink water and you only drink booze, you don't have to worry about cholera.
There you go.
So King Solomon was able to survive that. And served a noble job of that.
Yeah, man, that's awesome that you know that. I really was like, man, I gotta find something that he might not know, but I should.
King Solomon is a great storied character in Lexington. I'm glad you brought him up. That's another one who, if you wanted to have another interesting. If I was interesting, I'm maybe hopeful it was interesting. But another good guest on Terry Foodie. She wrote actually a book and I can't remember exactly what it's entitled, but it's the story of the cholera epidemic and a lot on King Solomon.
Mm-hmm. There you go. Well, I tried my best to stump you, but it didn't work.
Hey, well, you got me 5 years off on Fayette County.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. Well, we'll wrap this up. Before you go, though, tell everybody where you can connect to you at, or where you can get the book. I know it's on Amazon and other places.
Sure.
Go ahead.
Best place to pick up either of the books is you can get an autographed copy or connect with me too through my website, thekentuckian.com. That's the Kentuckian, KAINTUCKEEAN.com. Of course, Kentucky was the dark and bloody grounds. And so it's that old spelling of Kentucky with an AN on the end due to a domain issue. I had to add the word "the" at the beginning. So now it's thekentuckian.com.
And you can get the book.
You can order the book on there as well, and I can ship them to you and sign them and do all that as well. So. And
you also have a Twitter account at
Twitter's
Kentuckian.
At Kentuckian. Kentuckian, and each of the books also has their own Facebook page as well. So if you search on Facebook for Lost Lexington or The Murder of Geneva Hardman or History Lover's Guide to Lexington or Kentuckian, they've all got Facebook pages.
And whenever I put the podcast on a post on Facebook or Twitter, I'll tag those in there as well, so you can get a good link or a quick link to that if you want. Peter, man, I really enjoyed the conversation. We will have to do this again when the next book comes out for sure. And you know, whenever you want, man, I'm always down for some history.
Sounds good. Sounds good. Well, appreciate you having me on.
You can connect to me at KY History Pod on Facebook or Twitter. You can email us at thelandbetweenthemeadow@gmail.com. Or you can also check out audibletrial.com to get /KY History Pod to get a free Audible book if you want. Anything else?
That's it.
All
Stay
right.
safe, everybody.
Thanks for having us. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next time. We'll see you next time. We'll talk to you next time.